We're going to go over the classifying animal notes for honors zoology. So when we talk about classification, what that is it's putting organisms into groups based on characteristics or traits that they share. It's called taxonomy, which is the classifying of living things and putting them into groups based on their body structures or anatomy, their DNA, or other traits about them. A taxon is a group of organisms that's within that classification system. So they share like characteristics or DNA, and they're grouped together in a taxon. So the guy that came up with all of this originally was Carolus Linnaeus. He was a Swedish botanist that lived from 1707 to 1778, and he invented what's called binomial nomenclature, which is the two-word naming system that we still use today to classify organisms. And he was considered the father of taxonomy. Now, he wasn't a perfect man, and he did some things that would definitely be not right in today's time, but he did set the foundation for classifying animals. His classification system included setting up several levels from getting more specific to broader as you go up. We've expanded this today now to include 8 levels total, the broadest of which is called a domain. And there's 3 domains: archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. And eukarya is the one that includes animals. We don't care for this class. We do not care about these other guys. But eukarya means that they have eukaryotic cells. Then there are 4 kingdoms within that domain: Protista, fungi, plantae, and animalia. And we are, of course, focused on animalia, which is the kingdom that includes all of the animals, if you couldn't guess by its name. So that's the one we care about this class. And anytime I ask you what kingdom are we in throughout the semester, you're going to always answer animalia. All right, so it goes from domain to kingdom, then phylum. So in our class, we break down phylums. And so when we already talked about in the set of notes from last week, that we are focusing on 9 of the major phylums within the animal kingdom. And then within each phylum, there'll be classes and orders, and then family, genus, and species. And depending on the phylum throughout the year, we'll focus either on classes as a whole, sometimes we'll go to orders, or even families. And then, of course, you're going to be researching several different species individually throughout the year. So this is another look at it with the example of a bear. So here are the species of just one bear. Then the genus includes a couple different and bears can share the same genus, but then they have different species within that same genus. Then for family, you're going to bring in this case, even more bears, like the panda bear. Then the order is carnivoras, which in this particular example, they're adding in foxes. It doesn't mean it's just the only one being added. And then the class of mammals, they've added in the squirrel in this picture, but it's technically the class of Mammalia, includes all mammals, not just adding in a little squirrel. It would also include many other things as well. Then the phylum Chordata, which they've added in a picture of snake, but it actually include birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish. All of those things are in that same phylum. And then the kingdom Animalia, in this particular example, they added in a sea star, but it also would include sponges, jellyfish, corals, every other single group of organisms we're learning about in this course. So anyway, moving on. So naming animals. This binomial nomenclature that Carolus Linnaeus came up with is a 2-part scientific naming system. Think of it as like a first and last name for the animal. So the name is often in a Latinized form. Sometimes it'll be like an English word that they've made sound kind of Latin, or a lot of species that were discovered a long time ago have a true Latin root to them or Latin word to them. But I know, for instance, one of my college professors that I had for biology classes, he studied insects, and he discovered some species of insects, and he would name them after people, like one he named after his wife. So he made it into kind of like a Latinized type sounding word, but with his wife's name like within that. So anyway, the scientific names are always going to be written in italics or underlined if handwritten. So when they're typed up, they're typically in italics and not underlined. But it can officially, I think, still be underlined typed, but it just looks better in italics to me personally. Right? So there's 2 parts to this. The first, essentially, kind of think of it like a first and a last name in a way. But the genus and the species will be what comprises that formal name. So the genus includes one or more physically similar species. So multiple animals can share the same genus. Right? Think of the genus would be closer to like a last name, where like you, your parents, your siblings may all share the same last name, but you're all part of the same family, all right, or in this case, same genus. The species in the same genus are thought to be very closely related, just like a family would be, and the first letter of the genus is always capitalized, and it's going to be what's written first. So why it's more like a last name, it's not written last, it's written first. Then a species descriptor is the second part of a scientific name, and it's always written all the way lowercase, nothing's capitalized, and it's always going to be written after the genus and never written by itself. So a genus can be listed on its own. So you could say, the Smith family, the Taylor family, things like that, and you're talking about, but you can't just say the Tom or the Ryan. It's got to have the full name to it. All right, so here's some examples of how these are written out. This barn owl is Tyto alba. You see it's in italics. The genus is first Tyto and it's capitalized, and then the species is alba, all lowercase. And again, you could say Tyto just on its own, and all the owls that are in that genus would be be what you're talking about. But alba can never be written by itself. All right. Some other examples here, we got the name for a panda and a narwhal. As you can see, again, they're all in italics. First letter of the genus is capitalized. All of the species is lowercase, right? So let's see if you've got it. We've got a chimpanzee and a tiger here. We've got all of its levels from domain to species. What are going to be these animals' scientific names? All right. For the chimpanzee, the scientific name would be formally written Pan trigolatites, just written like these two, and then for the tiger would be Pantheria tigris, right? So why do scientists use scientific names? Why is this such a big deal to have this formal system? Why not just say common names to them? Well, scientists use the scientific names to communicate about the same animal across different regions and languages, and it makes them all use the same term when talking about that one animal. Some species may have very similar common names. So one scientist thinks they're talking about, this one species. This other one thinks they're like, oh, you're referring to this other guy. And they're thinking about two completely separate animals, right? On the opposite end, some species will have a lot of common names. For example, puma, mountain lion, cougar, and Florida panther are just 4 of the common names for the same animal. All of these 4 pictures here are of the same thing, and all of those nicknames for it, all right? But they're all referring to the same animal. So with the scientific name, you immediately know, hey, this is the animal I'm talking about, and we're all on the same page, all right? So there are some things that are wrong with the Linnaean classification system. It didn't count for molecular evidence. Back in his day, nobody even knew DNA existed. All right. There also wasn't a lot of really good technology like what we've got now. So his was based only on physical similarities. Physical similarities are not always the result of close relationships, and genetic similarities more accurately show evolutionary relationships. All right. So, now we know how they're classified. Now we got to figure out, okay, well, now I've got this random species I've encountered. How do scientists figure out what it is exactly? Well, they use what's called a dichotomous key. It's a tool that allows the user of the dichotomous key to determine the identity of the items in the natural world. They may be for snakes or plants or flowers or birds or whatever, but they consist of a series of 2 choices that lead the user to the correct name of a given item. Right? So for example, this is what one looks like. It's just like a little chart, and you always start at the top and work your way down. So you're looking at this random animal, and I don't even know what this particular chart is for. I don't remember. But it's asking you, obviously it's either green or purple. So if it's green, then you go on to question 2. If it's purple, you would skip over and go all the way down to question 4. So let's say this animal is green. We're going to go to 2. It has 4 legs. We're going to go on to 3. But if it has 8, then we know that's the name of it, all right? But let's say it has 4 legs. We go on to question 3. It has a tail or it does not have a tail. So if ours doesn't have a tail, then we know that's the name of it. So that's what they look like. They can, that's a standard way to write them. They can also look like a flow chart like this. So we know it's a vertebrate. Then you're saying, okay, well, does it have fur? Then yes, it's a mammal. Okay, or no, does it have feathers? All right, we say no, then we go on and on and on like that, right? So we'll work with some of these in class and practice using them, all right? So moving on, let's talk about cladograms. Phylogeny is the evolutionary history for a group of a species, and it's using evidence from living fossils, the fossil record, and molecular data as well. Cladistics is a common method to make evolutionary trees, and it's classification based on common ancestry, and a species is placed in order that it descended from a common ancestor. So, like this armadillo descended from this guy over here. Right, you can kind of see the resemblance. Right, so cladograms are diagrams that display patterns of shared characteristics. The characteristics may be morphological or molecular. If shared characteristics are due to common ancestry, meaning they're homologous, which we'll talk about that term in a set of notes coming up soon, the cladogram forms the basis of a phylogenetic tree. A clade is a group of species that share a common ancestor. Right, so this is one without anything listed, but these are the different species would be filling up here where A, B, C, D, and E are. And then where they join up at the nearest point, like A and B join here, that's their most recent common ancestor. And so C and D would be right here. And then those two join up right here. And then down here would be all of them. All right, so ancestors all the way up to present day. All right. So, derived characters, or characteristics rather, are traits shared in different degrees by the members of the clade. So, the more closely related they are, the closer they're going to be on the phylogenetic tree. And then you have derived characteristics that are normally like hash marks along the sides of the cladogram, marking off what they have in common. All right, so everything above that mark is going to have it. So feathers and toothless beaks, everything above that are going to have it. Versus like four limbs with digits, everything up here has that. And then the embryo protected by amniotic fluid, anything that broke off below that isn't going to have it. So these guys, the salamander and frog here, does not have that embryo protected by an amniotic fluid. So it's not going to share that. Right? So that's the basics in the cladograms, and that ends our set of notes. If you have any questions, just please let me know.